This is the USA Emergency Broadcast Network, your source for reliable disaster preparedness information.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily the views of this station, its management, sponsors, or other hosts. If you have any comments or suggestions about this program, please contact us at radio@usaebn.org. That's radio@usaebn.org.
Welcome to the Zeta Report here on USA Emergency Broadcasting Network. We are live first Mondays of every month on the Blog Talk Radio site. You can find us also on Zeta Talk Archives and the Spreaker machine for USA EBN. My name is Andre. I'm with the USA Emergency Broadcasting Network. And I'd like to welcome back to our show Nancy Leader from Zeta Talk. Nancy, are you there?
I sure am. I'm looking forward to explaining the history of the prongs and what the heck is a prong. And by the end of this hour, you'll have a clear understanding. In partnership with USA EBN, Zeta Talk and the Zeta Report will be discussing the challenges of living on a planet beset with change, rising seas, increasing earthquakes and volcanic activity, weather gone wild, and the worry of what to do in a worst-case scenario. We will also inject Zeta Talk prophecy on what is coming next and advice on readiness plans and safe locations. Whenever Zeta Talk is quoted, please remember that prophecy is not fact, it is opinion. It only becomes fact when it happens. The Zetas are remarkably accurate, but have been wrong on occasion. Bear that in mind. For more information on this subject, please visit zetatalk.com or the Zeta Report on YouTube. Questions from the chat and issues raised in the chat will be addressed toward the end of the hour after the main feature has been presented. We have quite a few very current news articles that can be discussed, and Andre and I are eager to bring those up. And we understand that the chat room is crowded today. That's great. Okay. The prongs. The Zetas predicted a multi-prong approach to informing the public about the pending passage of Nibiru, as trying to get Obama to make an announcement, tried since the summer of 2012, had failed. Even before the news about Planet 9 hit the press on January 20th, the Zetas predicted this was going to unfold. On January 9th, they said, and I quote, "The announcement is again close at hand, a multi-pronged announcement so powerful and from so many sources that it could not be denied," end quote. Well, I was eager to see what that would be, and we didn't have long to wait. Prong 1 started right off the bat then on January 20th. It focused on what was being called Planet 9, identified as being out in the direction of the constellation Orion. The news about the newly discovered Planet 9 was treated to a media blitz, appearing in Time, on CNN, in USA Today, on CBS, in the Daily Mail, the BBC, NPR, Russia's RT, the New Yorker magazine, the Denver Post, and iUp Science, and on and on. You could type Planet 9 into a Google search engine and it would come back forever with people talking about it. The science behind the discovery was that the hypothetical Planet 9 was at the center of various perturbations, where small planets and comets were pulled by some gravity source. The science was solid and undeniable. What was not emphasized was that the science was not new. Long-period comets were shown to be pulled in that direction, too, by Caltech's Brown and retired Louisiana astronomer Whitmer. The Planet 9 discoverers, those two guys, they were side by side and took credit for the discovery. Some years ago, they were talking about long-period comets pulling in the direction of Orion. Yet that information was brushed under the rug at that time. By March 2016, Prong 1 marched into discussions in the media about the possibility that a planet like Planet 9, which seemed to be on the move, might be responsible for some of Earth's past extinctions: the dodo, the saber-toothed tiger, the woolly mammoth. The woolly mammoth had lived, per man's estimate, just some 3,800 years ago on the Wrangel Island up in the Arctic Circle. How odd, living amidst the ice where no grass now grows. The public was being subtly educated to understand that crustal shifts have indeed happened in the past. When Planet 9 was announced, Brown and Whitmer engaged in debate about a long-period orbit around the Sun. Brown felt it was 15,000 years, and Whitmer felt it was 27 million years. To make sure the public was paying attention, Whitmer was even misquoted as saying that he felt Planet 9 might pass through the solar system the very next month in April. Quoting RT, now a retired astrophysicist professor from the University of Louisiana, Daniel Whitmer, is saying Nibiru has all but arrived to our neck of the woods, and that the destruction brought about by its gravitational trickery will take place this very April, end quote. The science was solid, but not new. Perturbations pulled the outer planets in that direction had been known by the ancient astronomers, and was the reason the infrared team went looking, sending a probe above the clouds in 1983. Per a front-page article in the Washington Post, they found it, too, when a cover-up was quickly dropped like a blanket over the whole matter. Well, I remember that because I went looking for that and found that on microfiche in the Berkeley Library. And there it was, December 31st, 1983, at the bottom of the page. That particular article can be found on the Internet. Many people have copies of it, digitized it. So it's no secret. Though Zeta talk was not mentioned in the news about Planet 9, the diagrams being presented virtually screamed, Zeta's right again. For one, the path chart put out by the Zetas in 1997 showed the location of the 1983 discovery of Nibiru exactly at the location of the hypothetical Planet 9 aphelion, the point in its orbit farthest from the solar system. An image from Wikipedia shows location identified by the Zetas to be the spot on, or at the lower bow of Orion. In other words, that's where the Zetas said in 1997 that the infrared team found it. But we didn't know that until Wikipedia was talking about Planet 9's aphelion, I guess that's how it's pronounced. So, Zeta's right again. And I'm quoting Wikipedia, aphelion, or farthest point from the Sun, would be in the general direction of the constellations of Orion and Taurus. And that's what they said in the Washington Post, but they didn't show us a map until Planet 9 was being discussed. For another, Zeta's right again, the distance from the Sun for the newly discovered Planet 9 was estimated to be 20 Sun-Pluto distances away. My. And the Zetas had been on record since the start of the Zeta Talk saga, we're talking 1995, saying the Sun's dark binary twin was 18.74 Sun-Pluto distances away in that direction. Deliberate confusion was being sown about whether the gravity tug from Planet 9 was Nibiru or yet another body, but much discussion about binary suns was also in the media. Most stars are part of a binary pair, as is well known.
An edit a couple of days later that it's still, if you look it up, it doesn't say Planet X. It's in Washington Post. It's correcting the original article about the size comparison to Jupiter, and this is before the internet. So, that part that doesn't say all the rest of the stuff about the orbit, you can find on archives online. But to find the original article where it says "new planet discovered," the picture that's rolling that you provided, you can't find that on the internet. You have to go to a library and look it up on microfiche, where somebody took a photo of the newspapers and made microfiche. And so that's as far as you can go for that 1983 thing. But
yeah, I did that. I did that. I got a microfiche copy, and from 1983, and I have that in a file somewhere. I think I typed it up, and what's on my website is what I found at the Berkeley Library on microfiche and typed up. Yeah. Well, actually, they were pretty limited. The article itself just said out near, on the western edge of the constellation of Orion, and that would be where the bow is. But they weren't clear. They didn't say the lower part of the bow, or they didn't nothing. But now Wikipedia is saying here is where Planet 9 is discovered, and that's exactly what the Zeta said that the infrared team found that object in 1983 that they covered up. Brown dwarfs. Prong 1 also launched into much discussion on the major media about exoplanets being discovered, planets that could be life-bearing and orbit around distant stars. The concept of what Zeta Talk had called a smoldering brown dwarf was being introduced, and it was being called a failed star. Where Zeta Talk had been derided and belittled for their description of Nibiru, this concept was now being treated as valid. Quoting the Daily Mail, brown dwarfs are a kind of half-hearted version of a star that started to form but never managed to gather enough energy to begin the process of nuclear fusion. The discovery of the brown dwarf, which goes by the name HD 4747b, came after measurements of a star 61 light-years away in the constellation Cetus, indicating it hosted an orbiting companion, end quote. So they're describing that smoldering brown dwarf that we described. Essentially the Zeta said, Nibiru is neither a sun nor a planet. It smolders and emits its own heat and light. It looks like a planet because it's only 4 to 5 times as broad diameter as Earth, though it's 23 times as massive. It has a process going on which is not like our planets, Mars and Earth and Venus, etc. So anyway, all of that. It's all beginning to be discussed, and many times we see all kinds of exoplanets being discussed. And, we've discovered another, and on, forever in the press. Prong 1, was designed to gradually introduce the public to Nibiru, standing next to the sun, where so many in the public were seeing it naked eye these days. Zetas have always said 4 o'clock position to the sun when you live in the northern hemisphere. Thereabouts is where you'll find it. Depending on how the sun's glare might confuse the issue, or if the sun is a little bit behind the clouds, it'll come out better. But that's where it is, and boy, are we picking it up these days. Naked eye, no filter necessary, etc. Okay. Debate and confusion among astronomers was intended to give astronomers and NASA cover for their years of silence about Nibiru. They were, after all, under a national security executive order demanding silence. How to bridge the gap between Planet 9 out beyond Orion to a spot next to the sun? Well, bring up the subject of a gravity tug in the direction of the constellation Cetus. Now, it happened when that was hitting the news that they had a probe going around Saturn. And scientists that were responsible for this probe were saying, you guys had a tug out in the direction of Orion. We've got a tug out in the direction of Cetus. Well, Cetus, on April 20th of this past year, was, guess where? At the 4 o'clock position to the sun. That's where the constellation lies. So now we have the confusion about, how can it go from way over there to way over there? And then Wikipedia was saying, yes, but with this 27 million or 15,000 year orbit, whatever, how can it, that's awfully far to zip, when you're way out there in space, because Wikipedia was even saying that Brown and Whitmer had computed this far, as a travel for Planet 9 in 3,000 years. Well, it was just an inch, away from the bow. So how could it get way over to Cetus so quickly? So anyway, that was all thrown out there to be confused. But what they're trying to do is bridge the gap. And wait until I get through Prong 2 and into Prong 3, and you'll see how beautifully they're doing it, all the while being confused and debating, scratching their heads and saying, Okay. On April 20th of this year, when a group of NASA scientists operating a probe near Saturn, the Cassini probe, pronounced this gravity tug in the direction of Zeta, this constellation was just to the right-hand side of the Sun, at the 4 o'clock position to the Sun, where Nibiru was consistently being seen by the public. Quoting Space.com, Batkin and Brown made the case for Planet 9's existence based on its gravitational effect on several Kuiper belt objects. Theoretically, though, its gravity should also tug slightly on the planets, moons, and even any orbiting spacecraft. The new edition of Planet 9 could better explain slight perturbations seen in Cassini's orbit. All right. Exit Prong 1, stage right, enter Prong 2, stage left. How to explain that the Hubble, the Kepler probe, and the WISE star mapping system had missed Nibiru all these years? Oh, they were looking too far out, and Nibiru was right at their feet. In May, Prong 2 was born to explain this important point. The European Space Observatory in Chile had located several exoplanets in 2010, not located by the big guys. So there. Quoting Wired.com, an article on May 3rd, the little telescope that just discovered 3 exoplanets and one up to Kepler. In 2010, Michael Gillon and colleagues at the University of Ligue got their small prototype telescope built in the desert of Chile. Well, they were looking. They're not up above the atmosphere. They're not probes running all over the place. Kepler, Hubble, and WISE star mapping, all that big money thrown at them. But that little observatory in Chile, it found stuff that the other guys didn't. Well, okay, so now and guess what? Just wait till we get to this. I can hardly wait. I love this. They run the dark energy survey out of that observatory. That's infrared survey. That's how the infrared team found Nibiru in 1983. Yes, you can hear the drum roll. Okay, here we go. In that Prong 1 had introduced the concept of multiple exoplanets tugging on the solar system from different sources, the concept of the Sun having a dark, unlit binary was hammered home by astronomers from Sweden's Lund University on June 1st. Quoting Space.com, if the hypothetical Planet 9 does indeed exist, the Sun probably ripped the world away from another star long ago. Planet 9 was likely stolen from another star about 4.5 billion years ago, when the Sun and many other members of its stellar star cluster were in close proximity to each other. Oh my, we're getting a second star, a second sun. Yes, the binary of our Sun. This is yet another Zeta concept presented at the start of the Zeta Talk saga, that Nibiru's odd sling orbit was formed from the start, coming out of the Big Bang. Quoting Zeta Talk, the Earth was cold as the Sun had not yet lit. All this is a matter of astrophysics and not relevant to the discussion at hand. Nibiru assumed its orbit around the Sun due to gravitational and motion issues, which were at play coming out of what some Earthlings refer to as the Big Bang. This was, in fact, only a little bang, a local affair, however, end of quote. Well, what they're saying is 2 suns, and Nibiru went slinging past both of them like in a long sling orbit that looked like a train track, back and forth and back and forth. And out beyond the constellation of Orion, that gravity tug, that's the Sun's dark binary twin, a sun. And Nibiru trucks around that and then comes around our Sun and then back around that dark unlit Sun. That's what the Zetas said. Okay. The core message of Prong 2 was that exoplanets could be in the inner solar system, undiscovered and overlooked for various reasons, such as the fact that Nibiru was shrouded by a dense cloud of charged iron oxide particles. This is quite true. You know, the Zetas have said you're looking for Nibiru. It's more like a dim fuzzball than a bright object because of all that dust. And the sunlight shines behind that dust cloud and bounces back toward the sun and doesn't get through toward Earth. So you see it as a dark, fuzzy place, you know, and it's hard to see. Okay. This was emphasized by the announcement on June 17th that the Earth had a second moon. A little asteroid, only 120 miles wide, was orbiting the Earth. If this could be overlooked, what else might be overlooked? That was the point. Where the drama had grown to include Planet 9, gravity tugs toward Orion or Zeta, and possibly extinction-level events in Earth's past caused by exoplanets zipping through the solar system, unlit brown dwarf sun discoveries, and exoplanets galore, the central theme had not changed. NASA and astronomers are not perfect. They are groping toward discovery and debating with each other. Forgive them thus for not knowing that Nibiru was there all along. One thing was clear, however, in light of the large number of suddenly suicided astronomers over the decades to maintain the cover-up, it is clear that great courage had been shown by the Prong 1 leaders, Brown, Whitmer, and the Cassini probe scientists. And I'm serious. Those guys had to, suck it up and plunge in. You know, are you sure it's okay for me to say this stuff? Yes, go for it, do it. All right. The same could be said of the Prong 2 cast of characters, who were very European. Prong 2 included Alexander Mustel at Sweden's Lund University and the European Space Observatory in Chile, and freelance Spanish astronomers Carlos and Raúl de la Fuentes Marcos. Quoting IB Times on June 14th, after carrying out calculations relating to the hypothetical Planet 9, the scientists said the presence of even more planets could be better explain the unusual orbits of objects at the far reaches of the solar system. Now that no one had been assassinated, as in days of yore, more astronomers joined the search. Everyone into the pool. By July 6th, the Prong 3 cast of characters had grown to include, I'm going to murder these names, Severy Arseth from the Institute of Astronomy at Cambridge, the Subaru Telescope in Hawaii, Chad Trujillo of the Gemini Observatory at Hilo, Renu Malhotra and her colleagues at the University of Arizona in Tucson, Scott Shepard at the Carnegie Institute for Science in D.C., a team working under Professor Jacques Lescar at the Paris Observatory, and the good old Dark Energy Survey down there in Chile at the ESO Observatory. The cast had grown. Wow. Now this was really more international. We're talking European, U.S. We don't have China or Japan or anybody like it, but, it's growing. Okay. The great significance is the inclusion of the Dark Energy Survey, which is hosted by the Chile Observatory, known to find exoplanets close in to the solar system. Dark Energy Survey is using infrared to locate exoplanets and will be examining images taken over the past several years. Oh, be still my heart, because over the past several years would include 2001, 2, and 3, and etc., when, according to the Zetas, in the opinion of the Zetas, and the observation of so many people who were tracking it, in it came, according to the Zeta coordinates, and sitting next to the sun right now. They'll discover that. They'll say, oh, look, what was showing up on these survey charts. Infrared, of course, was the means by which the IRAS team located Nibiru in 1983. Quoting the Daily Galaxy on July 21st, The reflected sunlight contributes only a minor part to the total radiation that could be detected. This means that the planet is much brighter in the infrared, much brighter in the infrared than in the visual. Okay, real meat was provided for the Prong 3 revelations when a trans-Neptune planetoid, dubbed Niku, was announced on August 11th, taking a retrograde orbit through the solar system. This is significant because the Sun and all its planets rotate in orbit in a counterclockwise direction, considered normal. And we're talking about you're up above the North Pole looking down. And the Sun rotates in a counterclockwise, so does the Earth. All the planets orbit in a counterclockwise. This is all normal. And of course it's probably driven by the Sun. That sort of makes sense. The Zetas talk about the sweeping arms of the Sun, that reach out and sweep all the planets along in the direction of its rotation. Retrograde is the opposite, orbiting and rotating a clockwise direction. Niku is not Nibiru, though the names sound suspiciously alike. In the opinion of the Zetas, Nibiru takes a retrograde orbit into the solar system because it begins to jump what they term the sweeping arms of the Sun. This is vintage Zeta talk from the start of the Zeta Talk saga, 20 years old, and is reflected in the path diagram they provided in 1997. The sweeping arms. Okay, pardon me. Let me start over. First, Nibiru sweeps along with the other planets. It's going in a normal direction, but it's way far out there, aiming directly for the Sun, like a comet. Zoom, in its sling orbit. Okay, so as it gets closer in, these sweeping arms thicken, and it makes it more difficult, to stay ahead of them. And so instead it starts to jump rope, literally. It jumps over it. It says, you're coming from my left. Boing. All right, now go ahead. Move on out then, because I'm plodding toward the Sun. And then another one comes and says, okay, I'll jump over you. And by jumping over these sweeping arms, whoops, pretty soon it's in a retrograde orbit. And that's how that happens. Detailed descriptions of the path Nibiru would take through the solar system were provided by the Zetas, showing their predicted retrograde orbit. And the path diagram, which I will provide for my YouTube version of this hour with USA EBN, and it's on the website with Planet X photos, in there. Just click, and you'll find it. It shows that at first it is going in a counterclockwise orbit from 1983 for the next few years, and then by the year 2000, whoops, it's coming around, it's going retrograde, etc. And the Zetas, and we found it there. People who were following this with the Ra on the deck, and they found it in 2001, 2, and 3. I think we had discussed this at a different Zeta report hour, Andre, I recall we did. So it's there. You find all the details on, discovering Nibiru and the path in. Detailed descriptions of the path Nibiru would take through the solar system were provided by the Zetas, showing their predicted retrograde orbit. And filtered photos of Nibiru show this retrograde or clockwise swirl of Nibiru's tail, too. Coming from its usual position at the 4 o'clock to the Sun, that is in the northern hemisphere. You go to the southern hemisphere, it's at the 11 o'clock position, because they stand upside down there in Argentina. Whipping under the Sun, when you look at the photos, you can see it whipping under the Sun, and then it goes to the left and up above the Sun. Now we're talking about the tail. Alberto's wonderful filtered photos. He uses Mylar. Oh boy, can you see stuff. And here's Nibiru, and then you see this stuff wafting under the Sun and wrapping around and coming up above the Sun, and then all those brilliant moon swirls, which are reflecting sunlight down their tubes, show up under and to the left and above, but rarely to the right. And this is a retrograde swirl of the tail coming out of the North Pole of Nibiru. Now we have all the tools necessary for the discovery of Nibiru next to the Sun. The dark energy survey charts from the past show Nibiru entering the solar system. They will show in 2003, taking an unusual retrograde orbit. Nibiru is tracked as it moves in closer to the sun. Voila! Nibiru is announced to the world right where the Zeta said it would be. I mean, that's how close we are. Guys, we got the retrograde orbit. We got the infrared dark energy survey checking their older charts. They're going to find an exoplanet. They'll say, oh, look, what's this? And they're going to say, oh, but it has a retrograde orbit. Huh, well, that's not so unusual. We know about Niku, and et cetera. And the next thing we know, they're going to tick, 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 connect the dots and find that it's over there next to the sun. And then they're going to say, oh, wait, isn't that where so many people have said they see something? They see what they think is a second sun, a planetary orb or something like that. Now and then, it's okay, we're so close. Now, following the announcement about Niku's retrograde orbit on August 11th, there was an announcement about the planet's Proxima B, found orbiting a Proxima Centauri star. It was emphasized that this planet was Earth-sized in a habitable zone that could sustain life and might be the nearest such planet. Well, what are we doing talking about Proxima B? And how can that be part of the Prongs? Coincidentally, it was discovered by the ESO's observatory in Chile, which coincidentally runs the dark energy survey looking for exoplanets in infrared. So it's all tied to, it was just a means of keeping all this in the news in front of people. In the opinion of the Zetas, this is no coincidence, as the admission that Nibiru exists and is real and at hand will lead to a break in the cover-up over the alien presence too. It will lead to discussions of the Anunnaki. So, in the words of the Zetas, the admission that Nibiru is real and at hand leads to Zeta talk, a communication by aliens, and this then leads to the Anunnaki. It is inevitable. So, for anyone who might not know, the Anunnaki live on Nibiru, and of course they have their handiwork all over the earth, great pyramids, the big heads on Easter Island, all the legends of the giants. It's in our past, it's in our history. So this is by them a clever way of admitting that Nibiru is there, and yes, we're going to have a crustal shift. To get ready, folks. Maybe martial law will be called, or something equivalent in most countries, because people will say, oh, well, then why do I have to pay my mortgage? This kind of thing will go on. And the alien presence, we're getting closer to that, and boy, have I got a good story to bring up. Andre and I talk about that little blue alien in Peru. And all the cover-ups will drop like so many cloths, hitting the floor at once. Ooh, look what's there. And it'll be wonderful. So, Andre, that's the end of my lecture.
Well, that's we've been following this Prong agenda. Has been just a recent thing for, I've been calling it personally on my social media, I've been calling it the multi-pronged scientific announcement, because it's not coming from, it was supposed to come from the top. It was supposed to come from the world leaders going to get together and talk about Planet X at that time, which is what they were calling it, coming through with the passage, and we all get together in kumbaya and brace for the impact. Well, there's agendas out there and there's cover-ups. So this looks like between the different scientists and the different areas that they're coming from, countries and that sort of thing, that this is, like the Zetas have said, and like your newsletters have pointed out, that this multi-pronged agenda, if you is putting the puzzle pieces out there, much like Zeta Talk has for the last 20 years, is that if you start seeing these signs and start putting the puzzle pieces together, it can be no other thing. It can be no other thing than a retrograde exoplanet that's not an exoplanet. It's actually part of our solar system that comes around roughly every 3,657 years, and we get ready for it. And we have some friends that come around and keep an eye on things for us. And it's getting this through to people and saying it, is one thing, but getting them to understand it and believe it is another thing. And that's kind of my personal mission out there is that, some people are I don't know how Morpheus said it in the Matrix, they're too tied to reality, that the reality that they're believing, that they're willing to defend it to the death. It's like their own little world, their own little Pokemon, TMZ, whatever world is too small to include another planet that comes around every 3,600 years. Well, it's happening no matter whether you believe it or not,
Yeah. It's very scary. It's very scary. And so, because what does it mean for my life? My life is going to turn upside down. For people who have been gardening and saving seed and maybe they grew up on a farm or close enough that they know about chickens and things like that, free-ranging chickens, it's maybe not so scary. But half our populace lives in cities. and they think groceries grow in the grocery store. And it's a terrifying thought, that the grocery stores are going to run, be barren. The shelves will be emptied, and what do I do to drink and eat? And so when you're faced with something unthinkable, lots of times you just refuse to think about it.
Right. But that's a version of cognitive dissonance, or the old ostrich sticking its head in the sand while while its butt gets hit by a meteor.
Yes.
You're still going to get hit.
Well, that's why we're here. We're emphasizing, absolute survival. You can get your vitamins from weeds and bugs, et cetera, and not just saying that. Well, we went into detail. We spent a whole hour on it. How do you make electricity from car parts? Andre and I, over a year ago, spent an hour on that. So houseboats, the waters are rising. Oh, what to do? Oh man, you cobble a houseboat out of almost anything flotation devices like soda pop bottles, fill them with air, put the cap on, bag them up underneath your whatever raft, and there you go. So it's actually fun. It's exciting. You can be resourceful. It's like a big adventure. So we talk about that. I encourage everybody to go through past USAEBN lectures, discussions, and pick all this stuff up, and you'll feel a lot less anxious.
Yeah, and the partnership with USA Emergency Broadcasting Network is going on. I think we're up to I don't know how many episodes, Nancy, but almost pushing on to almost 2 years of doing this. But at the end of the day, the heavy lifting. The heavy lifting on this subject really is on the person that's receiving the information. Take it or leave it. And we're not saying that. We're saying this is the information. Here's where to find it. We're talking about the prongs here. How many media sources have come up? Not just RT and before it's news and Alex Jones or whatever. This is way past tinfoil hat. These are scientists coming out and saying, this is happening, and this is happening, and this is happening. And maybe they're scared to call it Nibiru. Maybe they're scared to call it Planet X. I don't know. It could be leaked out.
They did. In Prong 1, these guys, first they said, a new planet, let's call it Planet 9. And then the second blitz of articles was saying, maybe this is Nibiru, like the ancient Sumerians said. There's a planet that comes through, and they brought it up, and they said the Nibiru word, and they said ancient Sumerians called it that. So that has been tossed out there, but that was right away in late January, February into March, and since then they have just said exoplanets all over the place. Okay. So I don't know what the plan is, but we're really ready. We're so close.
Right. And this really kind of ties into the whole process of human beings coming through and awakening too. It's just the timing is just so apropos. It's like, passage of Planet X Nibiru, crustal pole shift, recovery from that, and at the same time, disclosure through committee, I guess, at this point. I mean, we're looking at the alien presence being identified, and, what you have been doing your whole life and for the past 20-odd years with Zeta Talk is just one of those things that more people are bringing their consciousness to a level that, maybe all extraterrestrial beings are not here, to take over the planet like Hollywood says, and they're not just, crazy water creatures or what have you. There's some serious discussions out there with people that maybe if they wanted to wipe out our population, I think if they can travel between star systems, they would have done it already. I mean, that's
what the heck are they waiting
logic.
for, really? Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But they would have done it
I wanted to tell the story, and for those who didn't know it, this is New Zeta Talk. It's just a couple of days old, but this is a real incident that happened in Peru, and many videos of a little blue alien that could fluoresce or become luminous, or not. Like we have algae and bacteria and various things that can glow. Well, the firefly, is an example. So here is this gasoline station at night, and very popular, obviously, a lot of people. And there's this little guy, that starts walking along the edge, and then people notice it and they go over to it, and it's walking along, going in and out of bushes and things like that. And then when somebody comes close to it, it starts to float. You can see it lift off. It's like 15 feet up in the air, and then the person kind of backs away, and then it comes back down and starts walking around. More people show up. Now it goes out into traffic because there's a big highway zooming by, and you think, oh gosh, it's going to get hit. At one point in one of the videos, you can see that it seems like the truck mowed it down. It went right through it, and it disappears, and then it reappears, kind of on the other side or back on the highway. And then the first thought when I saw that was, oh, well, that's photoshopped, because how could this creature be real and then get mowed through with the truck? And then, but it's showing dimension shifting. It's showing this command of gravity, which aliens have, as anyone who's a contactee knows. They themselves can float, and they can even float you. I've been floated. Once I was very high up with the Zeta, and I was really afraid of falling. And his statement was just, "You are with me." Meaning you cannot fall because I won't let you. I can float you, and we can float together, and I don't know how they do that. Sometimes I try to, imagine that I close my eyes and say, okay, I'm going to float now, and nothing happens. Mm-hmm. But anyway, they can. So, anyway, it's mostly legs. It's a big head. It looks like a head with two legs underneath that are big and fat and stubby. And you can actually see two stubby little arms that come out now and then, but they're very small. And I'm not sure about fingers, but presumably. And when you look at the head, you can see what appear to be a couple of bumps, but it's all the same color and no different. They have no hair. And the Zeta said this is a real creature. And it was, volunteered and was allowed to be, because it can fluoresce and it's so easily seen in the night. Well, who can deny this? The gas station had 4 video cams, and people at the gas station had their cell phone cameras. There was, I don't know how many, at least a dozen witnesses that everybody could interview, and they were all saying the same thing, pulled in different directions by the cops or whatever, and they all said the same thing. So it's very solid. But my point is, look at the progress. This is called what Andrea and I like to call the awakening. Well, way back when, we had Roswell, which nobody was allowed to see anything. They had a dead body and this and that. But then we had things like, I guess they had, in 2008, we had a peeping Tom that looked in a window somewhere in Montana, out west somewhere. They had the Brazilian Roswell incident, was that 1996, I believe it was, in which little girls drew pictures of what they had seen, but the military swooped in and took these creatures away, sort of greasy, little smelly guys. And so far all we have is they had an incident in Russia, in 1998, or I may have the date wrong, but in any case, way back then in the 90s, and just pictures, drawings, and a rumor, but and then we had the release of the Skinny Bob video in 2011, which was the Roswell guy blinking and wrinkling his little forehead, and it's so real. People look at that and they said, "Oh, that's the real thing. That's not CGI at all." So here we have photos in 2008. Then we had the Night Walker in 2007 in California. 2011 we had Skinny Bob. Then we're getting a bunch of videos and still photos of a little creature that showed up in the UK, in Missouri, in Mexico, and down in Argentina, and it looks like the same guy. He's very thin. I don't stand 2.5 feet high, not big at all, frail looking, very non-threatening, right? But still photos. Now all of these are not of anybody floating, anti-gravity, dimension shifting right on camera. None of that, but now we have that. So it's a big step forward for the awakening. It's like, get used to that. Be comfortable with this, and this is some of the odd creatures you're going to meet. But I got to tell you, these hominoids, they're not the oddest creatures you're going to meet. Things get really strange. Hominoids are a minority, a tiny minority of the life forms, So anyway, that's another day's discussion. Yeah.
The other races are not going to look like the 1960s and 70s Star Trek, because those were humans in costumes or hefty bags or whatever.
Yeah, the only difference was that they had a wrinkly forehead and a weird ear. And other than that, they
were a different color, which, for the time was crazy.
Yeah, well, Star Wars comes closer. They do a better job, and it's clear. You can see that the authors and producers of the Star Wars series were either they're aliens themselves, just here for an incarnation, or they were taken around and shown what exists. But even at that, in all those bar scenes, they tend to walk and have arms and breathe air and but sometimes they have multiple eyes and strange appendages. But that's coming a lot closer to, what reality is. Yeah.
Well, Nancy, another one that's even more recent, and I know this has come up with the announcement delays too, which is announcement related. The SpaceX program, Elon Musk's space venture, which is a private company doing work for NASA and other private companies, as well as other countries, ferrying stuff up to the space station or putting satellites into orbit. Recently known for being able to use reusing rockets, which is cost-saving measure, and hopefully get costs down for ultimately, I think their goal is to go to Mars. But they've been having some problems, and what I know about the Elon Musk and the Tesla company, as well as SpaceX, they don't make a lot of mistakes because they pay people pretty good money to be engineers for their firms, for those companies. The SpaceX was doing a test of their reusable rocket form with the satellite payload on top of the rocket, and it's just a live fire test. So they're just turning on the engines for I don't know how long, short time, and then making sure that everything is hunky-dory. Well, they were doing this, I think it was last week, they were doing this, and the rocket exploded. Multiple videos out there, fantastic explosion. The payload actually falls off and explodes when it hits the ground. I mean, it's like fuel everywhere. Although that the tower that was holding the rocket did not melt, like the Twin Towers, separate subject. But there's some sort of speck of a saucer-shaped object in the background in a couple of frames before the explosion, during the explosion, and then flips away in a high rate of speed after the explosion. And
CNN
all
within the same second.
Right. CNN does their best to tighten up the video so it's just of the rocket, so the background image isn't there. But if you go there, the actual launch video is out there. They publicized it. They have cameras there. And there seems to be a fast-moving object there at the specific time where you don't see a beam like War of the Worlds or anything, but it explodes and the object takes off. Now that
Yeah,
could
I
be
have
above.
that on Zeta
maybe.
Talk. Yeah, I have that, and I have still photos of when the little UFO goes zip zip zip, and comes close and then it blows up, and links to the videos, so you can check Zeta Talk, New Zeta Talk, and find that on the Pole Shift Ning. It's there now. So what was that all about? Well, it was pretty obvious that it was a deliberate UFO blowing it up. Now, SpaceX has had success lately with their rocket, and they were even having success landing on an ocean platform. In the opinion of the Zetas, there was a battle going on because Musk was part of the elite trying to keep the cover up. Don't talk about Nibiru, don't warn people about the pending passage. Finally backed away and said, all right. And so the Prongs started and are marching along. So it wasn't SpaceX and Musk were not the target. Who was the target? According to the Zetas, in the opinion of the Zetas, Zuckerberg. Why? Because he was aiming for Africa. This big communication satellite, internet satellite, he was lofting up, having hired SpaceX to loft it up. And he's got drones over there, too, running around Africa, or at least that's his plan, to beam down the internet to Africa. Isn't he kind? Well, actually not, because he's a restricted internet gateway. He would control what went down and what came back up. He would know everybody's everything. Talk about total surveillance, right? All email, they would know. They're anticipating, according to the Zetas, migration during flooding, etc., from Europe to Africa, migration during flooding from India to Africa. Africa is relatively underpopulated. Throw down a few wells and the like. I mean, it has allowance for a huge amount of growth. Would squeeze out the local wildlife, I think, but nevertheless, it can take a lot more people than it has. And so they'd have all these migrants coming in, setting up survival camps, and guess who knows everybody's everything? They know who the leaders are. They know how they protect their perimeter. They know what their vulnerabilities are, and they can create and control these camps like slave labor camps for the elite. So Zuckerberg is in cahoots with Israel because it was an Israeli satellite, and of course Zuckerberg is Jewish, and this was a smack down by the Council of Worlds saying, all your plans to create slave camps, the Council of Worlds is not amused, and that's what it was about.
Yeah, it's this is not the first time that the SpaceX program has been swatted on the nose.
That's right.
They're allowed to put resupplies to the ISS and a couple of other games, and then a couple of times when they tried to land on the drone ship, didn't work out so well.
They fell in the water. Yeah.
Right. And like I said before, it's the media, and I'm counting the news agencies too, because they're for profit. You've got to, if you want to find the truth out there, you're going to have to dig for it. Or you could read Zeta Talk, and there's not a whole lot of fibbing going on that site. It's, we're here just to present the information, and especially with the combination with Zeta Talk, poleshift.ning.com, as well as USAEBN, we're providing the information of the positive outcome, how to survive it, how to see it coming, and the passage of Nibiru, Planet X, was going to cause a crustal pole shift, a 90-degree, in the opinion of Zetas, a 90-degree shift to the right of your map system. So just imagine the core of the Earth being stopped by a big magnet, and the outside of the Earth kind of keeps moving from momentum, the crust and the water and the atmosphere. So we're seeing some of that, not necessarily a severe wobble as predicted, but more of that sloshing of the oceans, the inundations. We're seeing more earthquakes in specific areas, such as the 5.6, which is much bigger than that if you look at the damage in a larger area, not in that specific epicenter. But looking at some of these shifts of the plates, it's almost getting ready to, these are hints. The severe weather that is strange and getting stranger is not being caused by man-made global warming. However much money they throw at it, it's not being caused by. This is pole shift. So this is what we're talking about, and with all the things that Nancy and I have put out with, you know, the USA EBN archive is, you know, how to survive different situations, building communities, you know, being able to not just start a fire, but, you know, thrive and have, you know, a community garden. If you can do that and get practice and then be able to do it outside of the city when the city is no longer survivable, that sort of thing, get away from the coastlines, get up above flood zones, current flood zones, and you know, there's things you can do to get prepared for what's going to happen. And the poleshift.ning.com has a lot of great tools which discusses the 7 steps to determining your safe location. The safe locations PDF file has major cities and countries and areas where the Zetas go through different situations for your specific area. And, you know, it's not personal. It's just, it's earth changes. And if you don't notice that yet, you will. And we're here to help you with getting through it. And it's like, everybody can light their hair on fire and run around. That's easy. Being prepared is well, you know, being prepared means you're ready before it happens. You know, I'll just go to Walmart when, you know, Nibiru passes. I'm like, okay, first of all, half the Walmarts are going to be shut down and used for something else. A. B, you're probably not the first one to think of that. So, you know, people, you know, it's going to be food riots and migration issues. You know, it's like, oh, we'll get out of Florida. Well, not anymore. I mean, I don't want to be the doom and gloom part of this episode, but when we're talking about the seriousness of what's happening, these signs are there. I mean, we're not to the last weeks before pole shift yet. We're not to the passage, you know, seeing Planet X or this big red ball with the tails in the sky every day. But once you do, it might be too late to do these extra things. It's, you know, making partnerships with the people in your community or neighborhood, being able to know what a survival skills is, making electricity from car parts, that sort of thing. That's right. Where we come in.
Yes, so true. And by the way, there were a few things that happened over this just recently in this last month that are indications of we may have a severe wobble. I think we talked about that perhaps last month. And we did have a minor wobble on August 21st. There were some people that, in Canada and the UK that told me, oh, the sun was way too far to the south on rising at sunrise. And sure enough, that same day, Santos, Brazil, which is on the very southern side, had what they called a tsunami, but it wasn't. They didn't have a storm. There was no earthquakes except way close to Morocco, you know, way over in that direction. What it was a counter slosh. So the North Pole tipped away, and all the water ran up against Antarctica, and then when the globe bounced back, you know, the water ran off of and went toward Brazil, you know, and hit the coastlines there. So that was an example of a wobble slosh, you know, and it rolled right over all the sea barriers. It was rather minor compared to what sloshing will be. But we had a little slosh on August 21st, you know, from all these different. And then what about the new Madrid rip? We're getting ready for that. The 5.6 in Oklahoma, that was not a 5.6. Now, albeit the buildings didn't fall down hardly at all. But it was felt all the way from North Dakota all the way to Houston. We felt it here in central Wisconsin. There were people that sent me email from Minnesota saying, oh, I was at the mall and woo, we felt it. Well, 1,255 span, you don't get that kind of a span from a 5.6. The Zetas said, in the opinion of the Zetas, it was deep rock quake, you know, adjustments. And if you take a look where that line is from North Dakota down to Houston, it's just to the west of where the hard rock is in Wisconsin and Chicago and down. Even the New Madrid, the upper New Madrid is on hard rock. And so this was making an adjustment in the North American continent because the hard rock is not quite ready to rip, but it's coming. We're getting hints of severe wobble. We're getting hints of the New Madrid right around the corner. And when that happens, things are going to start clicking more rapidly. So, folks, Start saving seed. You have a pumpkin this fall. Don't throw that seed out. Rinse it, dry it, bag it. The same thing with corn. The same thing, learn how to save seed. You may have a dull diet, always eating the same thing, but you'll be well fed.
Food.
Corn
Yep.
and amaranth together form a lysine-rich diet that's equivalent of red meat. Amaranth is one of the very best plants. Get a hold of that seed. The seed lives forever, just about, too. And you can eat the leaves, you can eat the little seeds, the whole, entirely edible. In Oklahoma, that was not a 5.6. Now, albeit the buildings didn't fall down, hardly at all. But it was felt all the way from North Dakota all the way to Houston. We felt it here in central Wisconsin. There were people that sent me email from Minnesota saying, I was at the mall and woo, we felt it. Well, 1,255 span, you don't get that kind of a span from a 5.6. The Zetas said, in the opinion of the Zetas, it was deep rock quake, adjustments. And if you take a look where that line is from North Dakota down to Houston, it's just to the west of where the hard rock is in Wisconsin and Chicago and down, even the New Madrid. The upper New Madrid is on hard rock. And so this was making an adjustment in the North American continent because the hard rock is not quite ready to rip, but it's coming. We're getting hints of severe wobble. We're getting hints of the New Madrid right around the corner. And when that happens, things are going to start clicking more rapidly. So folks, start saving seed. You have a pumpkin this fall. Don't throw that seed out. Rinse it, dry it, bag it. The same thing with corn. The same thing, learn how to save seed. You may have a dull diet, always eating the same thing, but you'll be well fed.
Food.
Corn and amaranth together form a lysine-rich diet that's equivalent of red meat. Amaranth is one of the very best plants. Get a hold of that seed. The seed lives forever, just about, too. And you can eat the leaves, you can eat the little seeds, the whole, entirely edible.